Hi, my name's Knott, as Gerard just said. I lead the cloud platform business in Australia and New Zealand. I'm going to talk to you about what cloud platform essentially is. I'm going to talk to you about the strategy, the differentiation, what we actually feel like we can add in terms of the market. And I'm going to loop that back into what that means for you guys in terms of devices. But before we just started, I just wanted to quickly get a sense of kind of the audience here and who's actually done, work in the cloud thus far. Can I get a show of hands who's actually doing infrastructure work in the cloud today? Have you done anything with Google Cloud as yet? I know you have. I've definitely seen you before. Okay, cool. A few there. Have you done stuff with Amazon? Yep, a couple more. Okay, awesome. So it's good. So it sounds like there's a fair few of you doing work in that particular space. Is there mostly technical people here, or is there quite a few business people as well? So business people, quickly hands up. Business, and then technical. About half. Okay, a few more technical people. Okay, so I'll try and sort of tailor the presentation as we kind of go through. I guess just to quickly set the scene, I'm sure you've seen a number of these numbers out here today. It's ridiculous how quickly the number of devices, mobile devices, sensors, IoT-based scenarios are growing. This is the latest number for 2017. It's 8.4 billion. I know that Neil showed you some of these numbers earlier on. Ridiculous growth. It's like 30% growth since last year. So it's phenomenal in terms of the opportunity that we have out there, and there's obviously more and more devices. But actually the value, I feel, is really linked into connected experiences. It's really about taking those devices, taking the data associated with those devices, bringing it together with the cloud and all of the data associated with that, with the analytics and machine learning. That's really where the value, I believe, is actually at. When you think about your business users, when you think about consumers, they're really interested in personalized services. They're looking for dynamic responses on their applications. They're looking for things that link into their location, the sensors that are associated with maybe their mobile device or their IoT device, and they're looking for you to add more value back to them. And I'm going to talk, as I say, about the cloud piece to start with. I'll start at the beginning and go through that, but really this is kind of setting the scene for where I want to get to. I want to talk to you about kind of the things that you can use in our cloud today that really, I believe, loop together both the device piece of the puzzle with the data, the cloud, and then obviously deriving the value for the end user ultimately. But really just start at the beginning. I know Neil showed this slide earlier on as well. Just want to talk a little bit about Google's infrastructure. So we've been going for 18 or so years. For about 10 or 11 of those years, we've completely changed the way we think about infrastructure. You can see up here that there is basically 8 incredibly large web-scale businesses that we have and that we run across the globe. All of these run in a single infrastructure based around the globe. It's incredibly large. We have 33 different locations. We're essentially in a position where we have over 100 points of presence, including caching facilities that hang off the back of that. We have 3 of those in Australia right now. And all of those are connected via our own fiber private software-defined network. So it's an incredibly large environment. Each one of these services runs within a container. So we don't think about them running in a single environment or a single location. We can basically move those services around in the same single infrastructure on a global sort of basis. Now, Google Cloud Platform is essentially the externalization of that exact scenario. So it's quite different from our competition. Our competition have typically learned how to run a web scale business, and then they've taken that and they've split off a completely separate business and they've spun up new infrastructure to be able to go and deliver that to you. What we're doing is we're basically taking exactly the same infrastructure and we're externalizing that so that you can leverage that particular infrastructure. So when you run on Google Cloud Platform, you're running on the same infrastructure as search, the same infrastructure as YouTube, obviously all the Android capabilities, Chrome, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an incredibly differentiated sort of offering that we have in place. And when you think about the economics associated with that, it's quite different. Now, we're not building something separate to deliver a service to you. All we're doing is we're taking an incredibly large infrastructure that we have today and we're externalizing that so that you can essentially leverage it. And you probably saw on that slide just a second ago that in the middle of those 8 services was the Cloud Platform logo. So not only do we have YouTube and search and Android and maps and all the rest of it, Cloud Platform in itself also has over 1 billion users. We have Snapchat on our platform. You probably know that. We've actually just signed a $2 billion deal with them to actually run all of their infrastructure. They started on our platform. They're incredibly large in terms of the number of videos that they push through on a daily basis. We also have Spotify that moved Holus Bolus over to us as well on that particular platform. We have big banks like Lloyd's Bank, HSBC's bank working on us as well, as people like Home Depot, so big retailers as well in the US. But it's not just US companies that are actually on the platform. Trent, I was just talking to just before from Honeywell, and he was asking me, how many people do you have? And we obviously don't do a great job of marketing, even though we're sort of a marketing company. But essentially, we've done incredibly well. We've been in country for about 3 years or so, and we actually have around 4,000 customers on the platform just in Australia and New Zealand. And that includes 2 of the biggest media companies, one of the biggest resource companies, one of the biggest retailers, and a plethora of digital native organizations that work with us as well, which is incredible to see. And you're going to see more of that as we continue to invest in the region. In terms of the strategy and the way that we think about infrastructure, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I know that this is really more about devices, but I just wanted to set the scene at a high level. Really, with infrastructure over a period of time, it's always been about trying to abstract risk and complexity. We started off running our own data centers, then we started going into a colo facility because we were kind of like, does it really make sense for us to run a building? Does it really make sense for us to, work on the power and the cooling ourselves? It probably makes sense for somebody else to do that. So we basically abstracted that risk and that complexity. We then started doing that with things like virtualization. So we took it to the next level. We were looking to drive, greater levels of efficiency out of our infrastructure. We realized that we didn't need to, build individual siloed infrastructures for particular applications. So we started, to virtualize those things. But really, we think that the next wave is upon us. It's the third wave, and it's where we believe we kind of add the most value. And it's really about sort of abstracting to that next layer. It's really about getting out of the weeds of infrastructure as a service, getting away from administration, and it's really about no ops and completely moving to serverless. At the end of the day, you guys are working on devices, you're working on applications. You really don't care about the infrastructure that drives a whole bunch of things behind that. You just want to be able to access it, and you want to make sure that it works. And I think that's the strategy behind our business. When we think about our engineers, we think about them building the next, billion-dollar service. We don't want them messing around with infrastructure. We don't want them thinking about, does this thing scale? Have I got redundancy in place? How do I drive performance around this thing? Ultimately, we want them at a higher level, thinking about what is this service that I'm building out? And so the services that we build and deliver to them are very much associated with that. Everything that we try and deliver for them is a managed service, or it's a platform as a service. So they can worry about the code. We'll worry about whether it scales and whether it's replicated and whether it performs in a declarative fashion in which they're looking for. So if I just talk quickly about why Google Cloud and kind of why we're different, I think the way that I think about this is threefold. I think about value, I think about the risk associated with that, and then I think about the innovation side of things as well. So first of all, from a value perspective, I've come from an enterprise background. I spent sort of 10 years or so at Oracle. And I think one of the biggest things that frustrated me was that they didn't really understand where the market was, where it was going, what customers wanted. And I think that the current cloud providers that are out there are still potentially in that sort of old enterprise world. It's still very much focused on, you tell me how much infrastructure you need, or you tell me what your requirements are, and I will build something for you. And by the way, I need you to commit to that as well over that particular period of time. Now, our view is that you shouldn't have to do that. At the end of the day, that should be our problem. You should be coming to us and using what you need. It should be fully on demand. It should be fully elastic. And then we should be dealing with the economics associated with that. So there's a few things that we do around value that's a little bit different from our competition. So the first one is that we are as granular as you can possibly get in terms of the billing increment. So if you think about infrastructure for a second, we bill per minute. We do not bill per hour. So if you want to use infrastructure that's connected to one of your devices, typically, most of you put your hands up about using Amazon earlier on, you will be getting billed on an hourly basis for that infrastructure that you're currently utilizing. Our view is that just doesn't make any sense, because if you only use that infrastructure for 15 minutes, why are we billing you for the rest of that time up to the hour? So that's the first thing we basically do. The second thing that we do is that we don't believe you should have to commit, because actually when looking into the future, it's really hard to decide what you're going to do, right? When the Snapchat guys started off, I'm sure they didn't think that they would be in a position where, they've done something like 8 billion videos, I think, on the platform. I'm pretty sure they weren't thinking about that at the beginning. Or if you think about Pokemon Go, they weren't thinking about that particular sort of scale. Really, that should be our problem. And so you should push that back to us, and we should give you the best price based on how much you use, not based on how much you committed up front, based on a sort of guess of where you think your business is going to go. So the second thing we do is we've got something called sustained use discounts. And essentially what that means is if you use more, we just give you more discount. You don't have to ask us for it, we just give it to you. So if you use one VM, let's say, It doesn't have to be the same VM for an entire month. We just automatically give you 30% off. So that's kind of the second thing that we do. The third thing that we do in terms of the value piece of the puzzle is really around the scale that we have in play. So we believe that when we were looking at the market and we decided to sort of come into this, we saw that infrastructure and storage and those kind of capabilities were reducing over a period of time. So if you sort of take that 12 to 18 month period, it was reducing around 6 to 8%. Now that's great for you guys because obviously the services hopefully you're not locked into and they're reducing. However, when you take into account things like Moore's Law, that really obviously over that 18-month period of time should be sort of doubling the capability you have whilst reducing the same rate. Essentially, we're in a position where we should be looking at more of a 25% reduction over that period of time. And so we have a philosophy, and it's on our website. You can see that basically we're going to take the scale that we have, and we're going to take all that infrastructure that we have, and when we get those economies of scale, we're going to push them back to you. And we're going to make sure that you get a better price out of that. And hopefully you've seen the benefit of that because we've done that multiple times already on our infrastructure and especially on our storage. And as you can imagine, we're in a competitive scenario. Some of the other players out there typically follow straight off the bat there. So that's kind of one of the things we do. When I think about security, there's sort of two elements here. So the first one is the obvious piece of the puzzle, right? You need to make sure that when you're connecting to the cloud from one of your devices and a service that you build out, you need to make sure that it's fully secure. You have everything in place that you would expect from kind of an enterprise vendor, as it were. The second piece of the puzzle, though, is a little bit nuanced, really. So it's really about more the risk associated with it and you being not locked into a particular technology over a period of time and being a bit more agile and being a bit more portable. And that links into being open. You need to be able to think about using open technologies. But if I just take the first one to start with, just to give you an idea, again, when I'm saying that we're externalizing the same infrastructure that we use on a day-to-day basis for YouTube and search and everything else, we've got 700 dedicated security specialists that manage our platform every single day, 24/7. And so they will be working for you if you're on our platform, essentially, right? They are making sure, and as you can imagine, we are a significant target. We are making sure that when you come onto our cloud, you're essentially secured and your service is secured. On top of that, we have all the things that you would kind of expect around a VPC construct. We have a managed VPN service. We always encrypt everything on the fly and at rest. But on top of that, if you need to manage your own keys, if some of you are maybe SIs or partners and you're building out services for enterprises, you'll probably also want to be able to manage your own keys rather than relying on our encryption. So that's kind of in place as well. And we have things also like fine-grained identity management. So all those things are kind of there. The second piece of the puzzle, though, I think is really more important because I feel like we're honestly moving to a stage where we're still very early in the cloud and you need to be able to leverage the most effective services and the most effective location that you have in play. Now, if you start using proprietary technologies, that really stops the agility in your business. You want to make decisions fast. You want to be able to test new things. You want to be able to build and scale out, but you don't want to be locked in. And so a big tenet for us is all about open technologies. You'll probably know that a whole bunch of these things have already come from Google. MapReduce came from Google originally. Bigtable was the genesis of things like HBase and Cassandra and some of those database offerings. And so really, we're just going to continue down that path. Almost everything that we're doing is really focused on being open source. I think the key piece of the puzzle here is that we want to make sure that there is no barriers to entry, but also no barriers to exit as well. So if we don't do a good job, you should be able to just pack up your code and start sort of moving on, essentially. And so I think it's going to be really important to start to think about those things as you continue on. The third tranche of this is really around innovation, and it's probably one of the most important pieces of the puzzle here. So yes, we've got an infrastructure play. We have compute, we have storage, we have all those things that you would kind of expect. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're actually externalizing the things that are in our business that we see the most value in. So I'll talk a little bit about these later on because I think they link in more into the devices sort of story. But just as an example, we have like a real-time analytics capability in our business. We use it to basically pull all the logs from all of our servers and all of our routers, and we need to be able to analyze those in real time. Every Android device, all the sensors and all the information we gather from that, we need to be able to analyze in real time. And so we're externalizing those things as well. And the second one would probably be around machine learning. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but machine learning is becoming incredibly important in this particular space, as I'm sure you know. It's still, again, early days, but we're looking to really ensure that you can leverage those capabilities. We use them very extensively in our business, and we've started to externalize those. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So those are probably the three things. I wanted to talk now quickly about the investments that we're making, because as I said earlier on, not that many of you put your hand up when we talked about you using cloud platform. Not that many people know about it. That's going to change because the investments in our business are really ramping up right now. So Next was an event that we ran. It's our global customer event. We ran it about 3 months ago in San Francisco. So you can see there we have about 11,000 people there. We had about 100,000 people on the webinar. What was really great about that was just the momentum and the investment that we showed at that particular event. We talked about how we're now sort of delivering on the message for the enterprise, and the market, I think, was incredibly pleased to see how quickly we were moving in terms of the new services and products that we talked about that's associated with that. We also talked really heavily about the investments that we're making. So I talked earlier on about the fact that we have 33 different locations and these 100 points of presence and this network and this caching facilities and all the rest of it. Not all of those are available right now for Google Cloud Platform. So we're obviously externalizing those over time. But the really exciting thing is that Australia is one of those new locations that we're bringing on board. So we actually committed to 12 new locations this year. So we're obviously sort of 5 months in. We've got 4 out right now, and the 5th one is coming soon, and hopefully it's coming to a place that's very close to us. So very, very excited about the fact that we have Sydney coming on board. We're going to have 3 zones. That was probably one of the key things and probably one of the reasons why you haven't seen so much from us, is that especially when you're talking about web applications, about devices, latency can be an issue. And so essentially we needed to be able to have a location that was in Australia that you could leverage. So really, really excited to see that happening. Okay, so to link it back into kind of the use cases and the things that you might be able to use on a fairly regular basis and to enhance the services and the work that you're doing, I wanted to talk a bit more about some of the things you could start using straight away today. So I want to talk about mobile backends, a little bit about IoT in terms of what we're doing there, give you some more details around analytics and what we're thinking about there and how I believe the market is changing around big data and data warehousing, and then sort of skip into the last bit, which is around machine learning. So the first piece I wanted to talk about is mobile backends. How many people have a backend to their service today that they've built out? Just a few, a couple, okay. Do people see this as something that's going to be important down the track, that need to be able to start to get beyond the device, get beyond obviously the power associated with that and start to do more computation in the cloud and places like that? Does everybody kind of agree? Yep. Okay. So I think Firebase is one of those things that you can leverage straight off the bat. So it's actually an acquisition that we put in play. It gives you a single SDK essentially, and it gives you a real-time database to allow you to sync your data across all of your devices. So if you've got an application, let's just take a simple shopping application. Let's say that there's 5 people in the family. They all need to basically be able to see exactly what's on that shopping list. They want to see who's updated things on a regular basis. You can see from this snazzy little image that I've got here, once the data goes one way, it basically propagates to all the others in milliseconds essentially. So it's a pretty awesome solution. It's fully managed. You don't have to think about infrastructure. You don't have to think about scaling. You don't have to think about authentication. It does all the data sync directly for you. It has a connected storage environment. It comes out of the box with a whole bunch of analytics as well that you can leverage. It also has a bunch of messaging capabilities. So you actually can do push notifications as well out of the box directly to this. And one of the nice features is it actually has a test lab as well. So one of the big things that we find is obviously when you're building out your applications, you want to be able to test those at scale. You want to test new functionality that you have in play. So we actually have a test lab that you can start to basically scale those things out and see exactly what the performance is going to be like, how that works when you start to propagate that to your customer base. So definitely one of the things that I think you'll find quite interesting. Has anybody actually started using Firebase here, or anybody heard from it? A couple of people? Okay, awesome. So Firebase will be one of those services that will be available locally as well. So if anybody has any concerns with latency associated with the service today, I don't think there's been much there, but that will definitely be enhanced obviously when we're on the ground. The second thing that you can leverage, so that's all very well. Obviously you can sync data, but it may very well be that you want to orchestrate things. You want to be able to do some computation at the same time. And so we also have another PaaS-based service, so platform as a service or basically mobile backend as a service. we have in place. It's called App Engine. It's one of our earlier services. It essentially gives you absolutely everything you would need from an application or web app perspective. All you have to think about is the UX. All you have to think about is the logic associated with your application. You don't have to think about anything to do with the infrastructure. Again, you deploy stuff in a declarative fashion, but if you need to be able to build some of that other capability off the back of your application, it gives you a really, really easy way to be able to do this. We basically run it all in a container, so from a scale perspective, it's incredibly quick. You can scale stuff out. Snapchat runs entirely on this. It's moved to the new Flex version that we have, but just to give you an idea, I think I've got them an example in a second. They run their entire platform. They started off on App Engine very, very early on. It gives you a whole bunch of other things out of the box. So you've got hosting. You can basically monitor your environment, obviously update it. Today, if you go with the standard version, you just basically can choose from the libraries that we have in place, which is Java, PHP, Python, and Go. But we've just extended that as well because obviously there's a whole bunch of other developers that were looking for things like Ruby, things like C#, things like Node.js. So they're all available as well as a standard runtime. So straight off the bat, you can get running. You just think about the code. Do not think about any infrastructure whatsoever. We can just help you out with that. A couple of examples. I just sort of talked about this. These guys do 100 million daily users now. So it's just absolutely phenomenal in terms of what they do. They do more photos, I think, than Facebook and Instagram together. Like the number of videos they've done is absolutely phenomenal. They run entirely on App Engine. So that's basically the back end for everything they do. Up until fairly recently, they only had about 3 people running the entire infrastructure on the back end. So it gives you a bit of an idea how different that probably is from some of the enterprises that you work in terms of that infrastructure requirement. And again, it really links back to that message that I said earlier on. You guys don't care about, the infrastructure side of things. You don't care about having to scale stuff out. You just want your application to run. You want to be able to push your code and start, driving these new applications out to the market. And again, this is one of those examples. Pokemon Go, that was an interesting one. I'm sure you've seen some of the details associated with that. These guys run on a combination of App Engine as well as our container management capability. What was awesome to see about these guys is that basically they went to Australia first, right? That was their test site. They said, okay, we'll go to Australia. It's pretty small. There's only 20 million people. We'll test it out. We'll see what the market's like. So they basically built their infrastructure. They thought about what they would need in terms of the scale. They basically said, okay, let's 3x that. We'll build it for that because that will pretty much cover us. No problem at all. It'll be all okay. Within the first day, within 24 hours, they'd 10x their top mark. So 10x over their 3x that was already like higher than they were expecting. And we were able to scale to that. And the reason we're able to scale to that is because of the fact that we were using a combination of platform as a service as well as the containerization piece of the puzzle. It just drives a completely different message in terms of the agility around the platform. You're not thinking about spinning up new VMs. You're not thinking about having to pay and commit to these things up front. We're able to do that again in more of a declarative fashion over the course of it. So hopefully you guys have got an application that's like Pokemon Go. They obviously did incredibly well. So let's hopefully see some of you guys move in that direction. The second thing that I wanted to talk to you quickly about is IoT. I assume that we have people that are not just mobile, but also, more broadly interested in devices and sensors and all those types of things. It's an interesting part of the market. You obviously saw those numbers earlier on that we've got 8.4, billion sort of out there. But it's incredibly difficult to manage those things on a global basis as well. If you've got devices globally, managing them, pushing out new updates to them, figuring out where they are, working out the security associated with them, and then just the messaging associated with it. I think at the moment what I'm seeing is we're doing an okay job of doing that. It's painful. The administration is painful. We're typically pulling the data, but we're not really taking it to the next level. We're not really bridging that messaging. We're not really scaling it. We're not thinking about the analytical side of things too much. And things we've still got some more work to do, right? There is no, dramatic standards in this place yet. We're still working on that. And obviously there's a whole bunch of companies that are thinking through this. But recently, just at I.O. actually, I don't know if you guys know that we had I.O. last week, but we just announced Cloud IoT Core. And really what we're trying to do with this particular offering is really just do the same things that we're talking about before. We just want to take away the pain of managing these things. So essentially what we're doing here is 2 things. We're giving you device management capability, much sort of, in a similar vein to the things that the Chrome team and Android team are doing. We just want to make it easy for you to be able to propagate these devices, to upgrade them, to manage them, to secure them. So that's one of the key things that we're sort of doing associated with that. And then from a messaging perspective as well, we've actually got a new bridge protocol that we've basically got out. So it's MQTT, it's over TLS 1.2, I think, which is the latest from a security perspective. And it's basically packaging this up and giving it to you as a managed service. But on top of that, you've also got a whole bunch of other things that you can do here. You can see, we've got a messaging queue that you can jump into that's globally available on our platform. It's the same messaging queue that we use for our ads billing platform. So it scales pretty well. We also have a cloud data flow capability because it may very well be that you need to do some transformation when you push that data across. Basically what data flow does is both batch and real time, it will allow you to do that in the process essentially. So you can set it up. You don't have to think about infrastructure again. You just think about the pattern that you need from an ETL perspective, and then we will manage everything else associated with that. And then obviously you can jump straight into the back-end analytical capabilities. So we have things like BigQuery, which is our real-time analytics platform. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. We have our machine learning capabilities that just tag straight onto this. So you can start to take that data and start to train. And then lastly, we also have a visualization capability as well. So you can actually start to now see where are these devices? What are they doing? What data do we have? And obviously start to then propagate that information back into the system. I think that's probably one of the biggest areas that we're seeing is that we're capturing that data well. We are storing it. We're not doing such a great job yet of being able to analyze that in the right way and then automate that process back into those devices to start to drive the value associated with that. So Cloud IT is in private beta, so you can jump onto our website and hopefully gain access to that and have a bit of a play. We've got some pretty cool customers that are doing some stuff in this space. I'm not sure whether the team has already talked about some of these, but Coca-Cola, obviously a pretty significant business. They are using this really heavily. They've got beacons all over the globe that are essentially pulling all the data back from. They want to be able to obviously understand what their consumers are doing, what's happening in their supply chain. They want to be able to take that data and then push that back basically to the individual retailers that are starting to present their product. We've got companies like Philips Hue. So if you don't know this, obviously the guys have got different lights. You can choose any color that you want. You can manage that via a mobile device. It's really about starting to gain more data associated with what are people doing, what do they like, is there a particular time frame associated with that, a particular location that's associated with that, and obviously driving new information that can be built back into the product. There's a whole bunch of others. There's a plethora of them here. Maybe I'll call out one more, which is maybe Motorola. Motorola is pretty awesome. Obviously, they have lots of different parts of their business, but their mobile devices business, every piece of data from their sensors goes back into our platform. They have something in the region of around 100 petabytes of data, which they have available in BigQuery, which they can analyze on a regular basis. So if you think about kind of just even the infrastructure that you would need to have in place to try and manage that sort of side of things, I'll tell you a little bit more about how we do that and how they've been able to do that in our platform. Okay, so big data. So this is pretty near and dear to my heart. As I told you earlier, I worked at Oracle for quite a number of years. So databases, data warehousing is something that I know a fair bit about. And it always frustrated me that it was incredibly difficult to get these projects up and running. One of the really key challenges associated with data and analytics is that often you need to know the questions you want to ask before you build your infrastructure. It's obviously completely about face. I mean, essentially where you're at is that you need to be able to try and speed things up. You need to be able to obviously build an index to then build out your database, and then you need to iterate on that. When you iterate on that, it's not quick, right? We have to think about the index again. We have to think about the questions we want to ask, et cetera, et cetera. It really is not the model that we need going forward. The model that we need going forward is just a place that you can store all of your data incredibly cheaply. It needs to be dislocated or divorced essentially from your compute, because you don't want to have to think about my compute is a certain size because it deals with a certain amount of data and a certain amount of computation. You need to be able to divorce those two things. And I'll talk a bit about how we do that in a second. But if you look at this wheel, these are the things that you normally have to think about. And this is incredibly painful, right? You've got to think about monitoring your environment. You've got to think about provisioning it. You've got to think about the reliability. You've got to think about improvements around that. How do you deploy that? How do you do tuning around that? Those are all the things that you do. And when I talked to my customers, what I generally found was they were probably spending 80 to 90% of their time managing the infrastructure and 10% of their time or 20% of the time actually doing the analytics. That's the piece that adds the value. that we can then push back into those applications. The bit that I said earlier on, right? We want the consumers, we want the end users to be able to understand and see the value from the analytics and the data we're able to derive. And so this is what we think it should be like. We just think, get rid of all that other stuff. I don't want to think about tuning. I don't want to think about monitoring. I don't want to think about, sizing it. I don't want to think about any of that stuff. You should just be focused in your business on just analyzing the data. And that's kind of the way that we think about that in our business. I know there's a few sort of wry smiles coming from the audience there because they're like, oh yeah, right. But that's how we do it in our business, honestly. So, I use BigQuery absolutely every single day. We have to make sure that we democratize our data, and it's in the hands of the people that are at the forefront of your business that can make decisions associated with that. And so what we've done is we've basically got a system whereby we've got a very large storage environment. It's incredibly cheap to store because you need to be able to do that. Again, if you limit people by cost, then you're not going to be able to get the right solution, the right outcomes. So we have a storage environment. It's basically 2 cents a gig. After 90 days, it goes down to 1 cent a gig, which is pretty cool. And then from a compute perspective, what we basically do is we denormalize all the data. We basically ingest it in a denormalized fashion. You don't have to think about any indexes whatsoever, so you don't have to think about these questions that you want to ask associated with that. And essentially what we do is we just parallelize your query every time you run it. So there's probably maybe 1,000 servers every single time you run a SQL statement, or if you've got some sort of visualization capability off the top of that, and you sort of hit the go button, it's probably 1,000 servers that basically we split that query up over so that we can answer that in incredibly quick period of time. So if it's terabytes, we can do that in seconds. Hundreds, probably in tens of seconds. But it kind of gives you a bit of an idea of how kind of things are different. And if you think about the old world of databases and data warehousing versus what we need and the amount of data that we're going to gather from all the devices and all the sensors and the applications that you guys build, we need a different model because we need to be able to be agile. And the people in your business that need to start asking questions about, what is the value of this and what new things can we do for our consumers, they need to be able to do that really quickly. What they don't want to be doing is going to IT and saying, hey, can I ask this question? Can you build me some sort of view that I can then sort of query in about a week or 2 weeks or whatever? That's not the way we think things should work. So that's kind of what we do. You can see a quick example there. You can stream your data directly into this, and I think Trent's going to talk about that in a second and give you a bit of a demo as to sort of how they're doing that. Or you can basically ingest that, as a batch type scenario. How am I doing for time? Okay, cool. Couple of quick examples. I talked a little bit about Spotify earlier on. Spotify is probably one of my favorite companies. They obviously run on our platform, which is cool. So that sort of helps. But you can see kind of the things that they say about moving to our platform. They didn't move to our platform from an infrastructure perspective. They moved to our platform because they were interested in the data side of things. Their business or their core business is not about infrastructure, right? They're a global business. They have a ridiculous number of users on the front end. But they know that the value that they add is about personalized music. That's what it is, right? That's the key part of their business. And they don't want to focus on anything else other than that. So first of all, they got rid of the infrastructure and we ran that. But then secondly, they knew that we had a leg up in terms of both the analytics side of things as well as machine learning. When you've got the guy who basically heads up all of their analytics globally for Spotify saying that BigQuery is the bomb and, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me, I'm sure he needs to probably get out a little bit more, but it's a pretty significant thing for them to be able to say. So I would encourage you to have a bit of a play of that and check it out. Last piece of the puzzle that I want to talk about is around machine learning. So we've talked about this. I'm sure the team has also talked about this earlier on. Machine learning is really everything in our business. Sundar got up on stage at Next. And he talked about how we're moving away from being mobile first, not that it's not important, but to drive towards AI first. They think that everything, the value that we're going to drive to our users, to the applications, everything that we do is really going to be focused around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And you can see here, this is one of the guys that basically went through our repository, our dev repository, to work out how many of the applications in our business are starting to use machine learning or TensorFlow or some of our APIs that we have in place. And as you can see, in the last year or so, it's been exponential in terms of the growth. So that's everything from Google search that obviously, propagates your search before you even typed it. We're trying to autocomplete. We're trying to figure out what questions you want to ask straight off the bat. It's things like YouTube, being able to search YouTube and search videos and start to, enrich the metadata that's associated with that. You can see at the bottom there as well, Translate, obviously the way that we run Translate. And Google Photos is probably one of my favorite examples of this. I absolutely love Google Photos. It's brilliant when you can pull up a photo of one of your mates that, they're probably not so pleased about. And it's so easy to find because you can either, do it on from a facial recognition perspective or something that was in that particular photo. But as you can see, it's growing exponentially. And I think the important piece of the puzzle is really that we need to be driving that out from a democratization perspective. So I talked earlier on about how big data needs to be democratized, how we need to make sure we're putting it in the hands of the right people. And you heard just then that Sundar's talking about this. We're driving this as, really the forefront of our business. We're really lucky as well to have this lady, Dr. Fei-Fei Li, who came on board. She basically ran machine learning and artificial intelligence for Stanford. And she came across to basically run that for us. And she's trying to ensure that we can basically break down those barriers for you to be able to access these things. Because this is the next, level of value that you're going to get from your applications and from the devices that you have in play. But we need to make it easier for you to be able to adopt these things. So there's a few things that we're doing there. The first thing is that in our business, obviously, we've trained a whole bunch of APIs already. So we've got a lot of data. We've built out our own algorithms. And essentially what we've done is we've built out APIs that you can leverage today. So in your devices right now, through a REST call, you can basically call any one of these APIs. So the first one is Translate. So, if you're a global business or you've got an application that's involved in messaging and you need to be able to translate between two users, maybe it's a game or whatever it may be, you can do Translate today. We have whole websites that are basically picking up their business and basically translating to get into new markets. How crazy is that you can think about basically having a business in Australia and then basically saying, I'm going to take my entire product or my product range or my offering, whatever it may be, translate that and deliver that into a completely different market. So that's some of the things we've seen people do. We have natural language. So obviously incredibly important. We need to understand and enrich the data that we capture. So it could be social data. It could be other information that is delivered to your website or again via a messaging service or whatever it may be. We need to be able to analyze that. We need to be able to try and derive new trends from that. Figure out what's being said without human intervention. We have vision. So vision is basically the piece that lives behind Google Photos. There's some fantastic apps out there that people have built off the back of vision. I'll quickly show you actually what comes out of the bag in this and I'll hop back. But in vision, you've got label detection straight off the bat. You can do face detection. We can do OCR, so we can basically pick out text that's in an image that you might need to be able to do. Explicit content, quite a big one. Obviously, that's an important one for us. Landmarks and then logo detection as well. So as you can imagine, the amount of data that we have that we capture via search and all the images that we have, we're using that to build out this algorithm and give you basically an API that you can just call. So it's a JSON RESTful call. You can build this directly into your application, literally in the day. Label detection is, as an example, there was a cheetah, or was the boat, there was a tree, or whatever it may be. Anything that's basically an item, essentially. There's an interesting story, actually. Wix are one of our biggest customers as well. They're also on App Engine, so they run globally on that. So they're the website design guys. One of the big problems that they had was they found that if they tried to connect with you whilst you were looking to build your website, bear in mind you might be on there trying to build something for free. They obviously want to sell you additional assets associated with that. But as soon as they popped up there and said, hey, what do you want to do? Can I help you? People would drop off. They weren't interested in that. They would go in there for the free service. They would buy stuff, but they just didn't want to be hassled. And so essentially what we did is we gave them access to the Vision API early. And they gave it to one of their interns. And they said, here you go, have a play with this. Because of our relationship with Google, we've got access to this. Have a play, see what you can find. And they thought, oh, they'll come back to us in a couple of weeks and see what's happened. Within 2 days, they had built something out that was production ready, and it wasn't GA, it was still in beta. It was production ready that they were able to put directly into their application that completely changed the way they engaged. Because the very first image that you chose when you were building a website, and this could be equally the same scenario when you're talking about mobile, they were able to sort of figure out what that image was. As you were saying, what's on that label. Is it a boat? Is it a boat building company or whatever it may be? I don't know. They were able to take that and then they'll be able to start to suggest other images that would be suitable. And that has driven the revenues in their business quite considerably. So it just gives you a bit of an idea. Speech, incredibly important one. I don't know if people have really used Assistant. Obviously, home is not too far away from being in country as well. We are seeing a dramatic shift in terms of people moving away from text to speech. We did quite a few demos at Next. We actually had eBay on stage with us. eBay were, again, one of these groups that had early access to the home, and they built out a chatbot, would essentially allow you to ask questions about items you had in your house to figure out the cost of it so you could put it on eBay. So they did a live demo and they sort of said, hey, I've got a camera. And they kind of, yeah, what sort of camera is it? And it was, okay, it's an SLR, blah, blah, blah. What brand is it? And they were able to basically get a conversational chatbot going that would then give them the answer so they could then start to push more things onto their website. So speech is incredibly important. And it's something that I think is something that should be top of mind for your applications. And then the last one is one that we just brought out fairly recently, which is video. So the video API does much the same thing as the Vision API. But think about all those images that you might have or you might be able to try and derive new insights from. It's really, really hard to figure out what's in a video. You know, when it's static, it's sitting there, you can't really see anything associated with that. But we're able to run the algorithm over that and basically enrich the metadata so you know the breaks, you know what's in those images, what faces are there, etc., etc. So, okay, I think that is basically it. I think I may have, did I lose some slides there, Gerard? Maybe not. So I think that's it. So I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot. Actually, one last little bit that I want to talk about just quickly. Second piece of the puzzle in terms of machine learning is we've done the APIs, so that's ready to go. But it may be that those APIs don't suit your specific use case. So I'll give you another quick example. We're working with a big insurance company in the US. They work in the car industry, essentially. So where they're at right now is that they want to be able to reduce the time and the cost associated with analyzing claims and crashes. So rather than having to send it to the claim center and then evaluate it and figure out what the scenario is every single time, what we've been able to do is build out a custom model for them to be able to analyze those images to figure out whether it actually needs to go to an assessor or not. And so what we've done to allow that sort of capability is we've externalized our internal algorithm or our framework for algorithms called TensorFlow. So again, it links back into that open source piece of the puzzle, and it's also breaking down the barriers for you to be able to access machine learning. Rather than, you know, if I throw out the word convolutional neural network, you're probably sort of like going, geez, that sounds painful, and there's a lot of math involved in that. What we're basically trying to do is we're trying to break down those barriers again so people can access those things and not just use, you know, vision or speech or natural language, but also build out the very specific custom model that you need for your business. So with that, I will pass over to Trent. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll hang around for some questions afterwards.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Hello. Quicker. My name's Trent. I work for Honeywell, which we have a stand over here. We make a lot of rugged devices, mobility devices. And one of the things that I've been looking at lately is integrating what we have already with mobile devices into Google Cloud. So what Ed's already been talking about has filled me completely full of confidence, because what he's suggesting and what he's describing about Google Cloud is the things that I've been trying to do. So why I'm doing that is quite simply is I want to provide further value for our customers. It's that simple, and the Google Cloud can help me do that. Okay. Right. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to grab as much data from our mobile device as possible. I don't care what it is. I just want all of it, because I know I can put that data in Google's Cloud, specifically BigQuery, and scale is not going to be a problem. So when I set out, I had to figure out where I was going to store it, which turned out to be BigQuery, and BigQuery almost has no upper limit. So from there, I decided to work backwards and find out everything I could about the device. So I asked our engineers internally, and they helped me dig into the device, and a lot of the things I managed to pull out. It's like 800 attributes I got at first, and I think I'll be able to push it up a lot more, particularly with the Google IoT APIs. But primarily, the first things I wanted to look at were the typical pain points that trouble our customers, which is generally around battery life. Over the life of a mobile device, might know that the battery tends to decay and you don't get as much battery life out of the device. Now, in a situation where a customer is using that device for serious business activities, you don't want that device to basically go and not be working optimally. So we can go into the device and we can pull out the almost hardware level attributes and work out what they are, and if the battery is actually starting to fail or starting to get have less capacity. So every so often, and it's configurable, I do a snapshot of the device, and if you want, we can just we'll go over to my demo. So this is our device here, the CT50. This application I wrote, it's visually completely unremarkable. But that's not the point, because it'll actually run in the background as a service, but just as a point. So if you press the upload to Google, what the application is going to do now is it's going to snapshot everything it can about the device. It takes a bit of time, because if you're going to snapshot the CPU, you don't just take one sample, you want to take a couple and sort of work out what's going on. And eventually what it'll do is it'll make its connection to the Google Cloud. And there it goes. Now, originally I was going to, I had it pushing up to PubSub, which is like the big queue in the cloud. But when I read about how much the BigQuery can ingest, there wasn't really a need to do the PubSub. In the application, it's actually a toggle I've got. You can upload to either one. But at the moment, I've just got it straight into BigQuery. So in the cloud now, because I've been running this application a lot, and we've got it out in the field with a lot of other devices, there's thousands upon thousands of records, and I'm not really even worried about how many records we get. It's just the more the merrier. Great. And so once that goes up into the cloud, this is just some application notes for the developers in the room. The application will launch and schedule itself on the device boot, and then it's configurable to how often it runs. And that's something that we will discuss with our clients and customers, how often they want it to run, because they generally be footing the bill for the data, which is actually quite small. I used Xamarin to do it just because I feel nice and comfy in the C# world, but Java would have been fine. In fact, if you look on Google's developer website, they support so many different languages. You know, they've covered pretty much everyone. And there's a few APIs which Google themselves have supplied, so they're fully supported. In fact, the APIs I think are reasonably easy to use. It's just working out when to call them in your application and things like that, which is kind of up to you as a developer. But they're actually quite clean APIs. It made my life quite simple. Okay, so once it goes up into the cloud, then we have the question of well, what can we do with that data? And at this point, I've discussed about the battery life, but there might be some questions that we don't actually know yet that we want to look at in regards to this data. So that's why at the start I tried to grab as many attributes from the device as possible, because we might have questions that we don't know yet, and they might happen 6 months, 12 months down the line. But because BigQuery is just so massive, we can just keep pumping data into it. We can ask those questions of BigQuery down the line, and we'll have all this historical data to go back through. So that's quite neat. There's some other things that I'd like to do about it as well. We're still debating about the PubSub and then pipelining it to BigQuery. Maybe I'll do that, but maybe I won't have to. BigQuery's probably good enough. Look, the only other thing that I wanted to do, and which I did hear about before, is beyond the Google Analytics, and then being able to put some real smarts around this, so to be able to do something quite predictive. So that's something that we're joining Google on this journey for. So anything that we can, find ahead of time that we can provide back to our customers to ensure that, their experiences with our devices is optimal, is just a really good story to tell. It's all about providing that value, and with Google Cloud, we believe that we can actually do that now. So I'm happy to take any questions or any comments or any critiques. Yes?
I have a question, Trent.
Yes.
How long did it take you to sort of get up to speed? And then how much did it cost you on BigQuery?
Well, it's costing me nothing on BigQuery at the moment.
First terabyte for free, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's my kind of price. That's great. But as getting up to speed now, that's a really good question. So I had some minimal experience with another cloud vendor, which I don't like as much. Okay, but in all seriousness, getting up to speed, it wasn't difficult. Okay, it took me probably a week to get familiar with what I needed, and then I read through the documentation and I drew some diagrams, and I think I pretty much had it. So it took me probably about a week to understand what I needed, and then probably another few more weeks in between working on other projects, because I don't get to allocate full time to one project. So it was probably like a 4-week journey, and I didn't really hit any speed humps to the point where I had to call or get in contact with someone at Google. There's generally enough support out there to get me going through. And I used a platform which isn't popular either for this sort of thing in terms of developers, being Xamarin, but there was still enough help out there, and it was quite good.
Any other questions from the audience?
The documentation was enough for you in that sense?
It was, because what the demo I showed you then was built off that documentation from Google themselves. So, yeah.
2 questions for you, Ed, in the Q&A. So I'll put them to you now. They're kind of both related, but so the first one, will the hosting compute facilities be accredited for use by government?
Tricky one. We are working at that right now. So we have IRAP actually in. So that is with the team that has to analyze that, which is actually probably the biggest part of the process, if any of you have actually been through that. So from a federal perspective, that's in process. We don't have it locked away yet. So we're pretty pleased at where we've got to, but still a little bit more to be done. But I would say we are very well engaged with a number of big federal and state entities locally.
The next question is probably pretty much answered by that, but does Google Cloud Platform comply with data sovereignty requirements that some customers have? And if not, are there plans to be able to comply with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the big reasons as well why we've got a local facility, is that we understand there's obviously latency concerns, but we also understand that you want to be able to lock down both your compute and your storage in that region. So you will absolutely be able to do that. You'll be able to have a storage bucket that sits in the Sydney region. And you'll be able to spin up either CPUs or GPUs that are also in this particular region. Yeah.
So there's been a bit of confusion around the old Google C2MA messaging platform, which got phased out into the Firebase Cloud Messaging platform, but then it got renamed to Google Cloud Messaging. So is Google Cloud Messaging and Firebase Cloud Messaging the same thing?
No. It's a good question actually, because I'm not sure of the actual sort of naming convention right now, but Firebase is a very separate offering that has its own messaging capability. Typically what we do is when we bring in an acquisition, we start to move them onto our platform. So the standard messaging platform we have right now is PubSub. So I'd recommend that you utilize that. And that's our globally available messaging platform, which gives you obviously both publisher and subscribe capability.
Is the question specifically for, sorry. Hi, it's me in the back again. Oh, wow. For Google Cloud Messaging is for Android devices is now been rolled into Firebase Cloud Messaging. So that was a rebrand specifically for Android stuff, but to the point that there is a separate set of Firebase Cloud things, which was mentioned.
You mentioned Google Video in one of your slides. Can you elaborate a little bit more on its capabilities?
Yeah, so the video API. So think about it much in the same way as we are able to enrich metadata associated with images, but we're able to do that with video now. So we can tell you what labels are basically in those videos. We can tell you where the breaks are. We can start to pull out entities associated with that. We can actually do automated highlight reels off the back of it as well. So we've done a few tests with some sports games where we've basically had ESPN with a human, basically they'll do their highlight reel, and then we'll basically do our automated highlight reel. And the way that we do it is we capture lots of pieces of data in the video. So there might be a score, that we can basically look at. We can see where the players are associated with, in the image, and we leverage all that to be able to start to push out highlight reels. We can also do subtitles and annotations and those types of things as well. And then obviously you can do translation and all that sort of piece on top of that as well. So it's a pretty important one because it's incredibly difficult to be out, a lot of companies have got a huge amount of video that they have in their archives, and it's incredibly difficult to be able to add metadata to that unless you have humans do it, basically. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
With some of those APIs, like the video API and stuff like that, are you able to lock those down to certain regions to continue with that data sovereignty requirements, or is it free?
No, we can't actually. I mean, it's a stateless call essentially. So it's up to you how you do that. You can basically capture all the data. So if you've got a video or an image or whatever it may be, you can lock that down basically in a storage bucket that's sitting in Sydney. And essentially you're making a stateless call to our service in the US. But it will not actually be located here.
And also, are you able to share what sort of services will be available in Sydney? Like App Engine, for example, standard is only available in a couple of data centers.
Yep. It is our intention to have App Engine locally, which I'm really pleased about. You probably remember seeing the slide. We had 3 zones. You need 3 zones as a bare minimum, basically, to have App Engine. So we're really, really pleased that App Engine will come to Australia. And along with App Engine, you'll also have Data Store as well. Obviously, you can't have App Engine without Data Store. So really pleased that we'll have that. And then off the back of that, we'll obviously have Flex because there'll be local compute that you can leverage.
Awesome. Thanks.
That's very, very good. The only thing that we won't have at this stage that will be local is the APIs, just as you said. We won't have we've got like a GPU farm that you can basically take your TensorFlow framework and start to train your models. That's too big to have here locally. And then BigQuery itself will currently just be in Europe and the US. And we're evaluating an Asia Pac region right now. Everything else you can pretty much expect to be here, including Firebase. Okay. I'll hang around. If there's any more questions, please feel free to grab me. Hopefully that was valuable. It was great to be here. Thank you for your time and all the best.
Thanks a lot, Ed.